Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me on LinkedIn Live today. My name is Yakemi, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Nina with me here today. Nina is head of people growth over at Membrain. Membrain is a CRM and sales enablement company based in Sweden. Really, really good to see you, Nina. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Ikemi. It's awesome to be here. Really excited.
I appreciate it. And we've been talking to you for some time now, and you've chatted to my team around culture, and there's so many amazing nuggets in there, especially as we as a company help B2B sales teams thrive in an environment where they can actually do their best work. I think that some of your insight around culture is absolutely fantastic. So I wanted to share that with my network. If you are listening right now or watching right now, please put in the comments where you're listening from so that we know. If you've got comments or questions, even for Nina or indeed myself, feel free to put that in the comments. We'll be delighted to come to any questions later. So first off, Nina, before you became head of people growth over at Membrain, what were you doing? Give us a sense of your career path.
Yeah, it's throughout my career, a few people have asked me like, but what do you do? And I'd say my go-to answer has often been, I don't know, I fix things. And so I have an engineering background, so obviously, solving problems is my default mode. And after I graduated, I moved to Tanzania for 4 years and then Kenya. So I spent 10 years of my career in East Africa, working very operationally, again, fixing things mostly in startups, either fresh startups or scale ups as well, in various, yeah, mostly operations. My last role in Kenya was COO for a plastic recycling company in Nairobi. And yeah, I think that was the role where I really learned that leadership development and self leadership are core to actually make operations work, because you can have amazing structures and processes and beautiful spreadsheets. I love my spreadsheets. But at the end of the day, it's the people who implement them. And if you don't have the kind of relationship, the kind of trust that people feel engaged in what they do and care about what they do, I mean, you can have the best processes in the world, it's just not going to work, at least not in the long term.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I shifted. So in 2020, I did professional coaching training, that put me on that path, and did some consulting work. And eventually I found my way to Membrain, very randomly on LinkedIn, actually.
Wow, amazing. I love that you've got an engineering background. So do I. And there's
Mm,
definitely that problem solving aspect. And I do think that engineering gives you a solid foundation where you're quite analytical and logical and tend to approach problems in a certain way, which can lend itself to any career path, I think. And so
mhm.
it's interesting that you're doing kind of people growth and culture right now, and I'm kind of doing strategy and marketing and entrepreneurship. So
Mhm.
really fascinated by that. Thank you for sharing, Nina. So I mean, you do a lot of work in terms of implementing and making sure that people are thriving, implementing the right environment so people are thriving. When we say company culture, it's quite, I mean, there was a time where it was quite a buzzword. A lot of articles and the likes of, I don't know, Harvard Business Review, and everyone was talking about company culture. And I
Yeah.
always like to clear up that we are speaking about the same thing when we talk about company culture, because these things can mean different things to different people. So when we say company culture, what do you believe we're actually referring to?
Mm. No, and that's a very good question, because as you say, like, just Google company culture and you'll have hundreds of various definitions. And I think it's important to be clear on what you mean by company culture in your context, right? If you're a startup or you're a massive corporate, company culture will have different meanings. So for us, company culture are basically the what are the behaviors that become the norm in an organization. That is what creates your company culture. And either you're intentional about it or you're not, but whatever it is, you have a culture, right? So then it's about you to choose to invest in it and again be intentional about it or not. But at the end of the day, your culture are what are the behaviors that we do accept and we encourage to have within an organization. That's how I see it.
It's really interesting because I see culture a lot like something like a personal brand, for instance. Whether you like it or not, you have one. I
Mhm.
mean, whether you've implemented it deliberately or not, there's something going on in your organization, which means that people that work there are going to act a certain way. They're going to respond to things in a particular way because that's kind of how it's done.
Mhm.
And so when we then talk about sales culture, right? Because I mean, every organization is looking to sell something,
Mhm.
whether you are private or public or not for profit, you are in fact trying to create some kind of value in exchange for something. So when you layer on that sales culture, what do you believe the connection is between the two?
Well, I'd first be curious to understand what is it for you a sales culture? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a sales background. Yes, I do work in a sales focused organization, but what does the sales culture mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because for us as a sales enablement partner, we are looking to help B2B sales functions to really perform at their very best. And that
Mm,
would mean things like making sure they have the right resources, that they've got the right people in the right role, that they understand the competencies that exist in the teams and the one that doesn't exist in the team, and we help them plug all those gaps. So when it comes to the culture, I would say sales culture refers to those behaviors within the sales organization that actually enable the right behaviors towards sales. And while that sounds like behaviors around selling, it's actually behaviors around how they treat prospects, how they treat a customer, how they work together, the way they communicate, the processes that they actually have in place, and whether people are adhering to those processes, right? And whether they're embedded and ingrained, whether, for instance, a good test would be whether, for instance, a new salesperson can join that organization and instantly know this is how we treat prospects. This is how we treat our customers. This is
mm,
the way we manage them. Are we honest with our customers? Do we tell them that actually the product is being delayed because parts have been delayed by shipment, or do we sort of tell white lies about it? How often do we follow up? And those kind of things, I think, altogether is a sales culture, which, to be fair, is a subgroup of an organization.
mhm.
But going back to my question to you is the connection between that subculture and really the overall company culture will be really interesting to dig into a little bit.
Mm. I like with that in mind, and thank you for sharing that perspective. It's very enlightening from my perspective, and I would say if your culture is going to be sustainable and spread across your organization, it kind of needs to be one and the same, right? Having different cultures, let's say our customer success team has a certain way of communicating, interacting, have some behaviors with their customers that are not aligned with the one that our salespeople have. Well, what's going to happen to the customer? It's going to be seriously confused uh, because they're going to have a very different experience, right?
Yeah.
And I see, your culture is a bit like an oil drop, right? It spreads. You start somewhere and you start internally with your employees, with your own people, and how we interact with one another. And because we are one being, you can't just, oh, now I have my sales hat, I'm going to have a certain behavior. And now I'm talking with my colleagues, I'm going to have another. Or even I'm talking with my friends or my family members. At the end of the day, you are, one person. And it'd be unreasonable to expect, in my opinion, that you change that much. And so having that core culture throughout your organization, right, that will spread, whether it's the sales team, the CS team, the development team, and all of that. The the core of it remains unchanged.
Mm. I
Does that
think,
make sense?
it answers my question, and I'm just reflecting on times when I've worked in organizations where it has felt like they are different cultures, and it tends to come from, maybe an acquisition, right? So you've got an
Mm,
organization, and then you acquire another company that's got a certain kind of culture, and you can feel it, like, as you kind of try to collaborate with both
mm,
groups, you sort of feel like, yeah, these people are not exactly like these people in terms of what's accepted and the behaviors and so on.
mhm,
So you make a great point. Overall, it should feel the same. The confusion for the customer, I mean, internally, there's obviously some confusion, but for the customer, having dealt with maybe a fantastic sales rep, had a certain kind of interaction and had a certain feel about that conversation, about that interaction, and then becomes a customer and starts dealing with the customer service team, and it just feels like a different company. I'm
mm,
sure some people watching now, or maybe watching this later, have maybe had that experience where it's like you're talking to the two different companies, because it just
mm,
feels so disjointed. So I guess my question, Nina, is if you are in a situation where there does feel like there's a bit of a misalignment around culture, the norms feel different, it seems like the values are inconsistent. What are some of the first set of questions you would be asking, I suppose, I don't know, is it management? Like, what are the first steps that a company can take to try to bridge this gap if they've got all these kind of subcultures that are not serving the greater good?
mm. Yeah, because it's all well and fine to talk about cultures and values and all of that, but having them on a poster on the wall, I mean, that doesn't serve anyone. So, I mean, the first step is to be really honest with yourself about, where are we at? What are the challenges that we have? Talk to your people, have conversations, have dialogues, and a, a building block of that culture are your core values. And having clarity on, as an organization, what do we stand for? And it's not about aspirational values, because I think a lot of companies, it's like, oh, we would like to be this kind of organization. But be honest with, who are we? What are the core values that we are living today? And that's your starting point. And again, ask your people, what do you feel our values are? What is important for us in this organization, in this team? Collect all of that information and then have a conversation with, as I would say, as many people as possible to get that input. And then maybe the people who are core to maybe your leadership, and it's like, hey, what does this tell us about ourselves, right? And where's
Yeah.
the dissonance between who we think we are, or who we would like to be, and who we actually are? Because once you have that, then you can start to work on it. But if you're living in la la land and just imagining in that this is who we would like to be, you're never going to give yourself a chance to really work on what you need to work on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think when it comes to culture and having kind of some kind of disconnect within organizations, I found that sometimes the senior management or the C-suite think that things are a certain way, right?
Mhm.
We used to say, they're in their ivory towers, and they
Mhm.
think everything's all going a certain way, everything's all glorious. But actually, it's not that way. Actually, on the level of operations, things are kind of different. So
Mhm.
just listening to you, it shows the importance of having that honest environment where people feel like they can vocalize what's going on, that they can speak up and they can be honest with you. Because if you don't have that sort of team around you that believes that they can be honest, then you're not actually going to know the truth. You're not actually going to know what the actual culture is. And
Mhm.
so what sort of things have you maybe done at Membrain or in previous roles that has given people that, I guess, confidence and courage to be honest, obviously in a respectful way, but to be able to speak up and not feel like they can't actually
Mhm.
say what's going on, especially if they believe that it's not what management wants to hear.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to trust, doesn't it? And that is not something that anybody deserves. It's something that is earned. And it takes time, right? Depending on what, as an organization, you've been through, there's probably some healing that needs to be done, some relationship to be nurtured and to be worked on. And I would say, from top management, it's really important that if you want to be successful in doing this kind of work and being intentional about your culture, top management doesn't necessarily need to be that much involved, I would say, more than maybe giving some guidelines, but they need to be on board. They need to be okay with, like, hey, we've got some issues here. We choose to work on this. And then, maybe delegate that to whoever's the most relevant team or group of people in the organization to do so, but have the buy-in from top management, because if that doesn't happen, it will be really, really difficult. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk, and because it is really important, that psychological safety, right, in an organization that is built on trust. And so I would say taking small steps and building relationships, having one-on-one conversations with people who, maybe don't talk much but have been around for a long time, being curious about what each and every person's story is, so that you can put it into context and behave in a way that proves to them that it is safe to have a different opinion. Reward, just by words, or an acknowledgement that, if you say something that everybody else disagrees with, so like, hey, you know what, that was really brave. That's,
Absolutely.
small things
Yeah.
like that are sometimes are enough to show, like, oh, okay, this, I can do this here, right? And
Yeah.
keep investing in it. Like, this work never ends. It never ends.
I think that's a key point, because at the end of the day, you find that people are going to respond to what they see other people doing. So if they see that other people speak up and nothing bad happens to them, if they see that other people had a different opinion and nothing bad happened to them, that gives them the courage. And it takes time. What I hear from what you're saying is that there's a lot of patience and being open to talking and listening. Probably more importantly, asking those open questions. I know when you were having you're chatting to Sam, who works here at the Caro, you spoke a lot, spoke about having this, open questions. I think sometimes we forget that open questions are really where it's at, where you're not, there's a guy a man we work with, Fergus, he talks about leading the witness, right? So you ask a closed question, you're literally forcing people down a certain path. But if you ask an open question, then you give them a chance to really kind of express what it is that what they're saying. So there's patience, obviously, in having those conversations with different people, not just the loudest voice, but like you said, people who maybe are normally quite quiet and have, don't say very much, but they have been around and they have a view and they've seen a lot, and so it'd be good to talk to them. And then there's the kind of the leadership piece. It's interesting that you say that the leaders don't have to be so involved, but they do need to be seen as role modeling this culture, right? So if there's a disjoint between what leadership is saying that they want as a culture and what they are actually doing, then you have problems, right? It's like, well, you're not behaving in that way, so how can we get on board with that? And then the culture isn't it's not sustainable, right? People might do it for a couple of weeks and then just be like, actually, my manager is not even doing this. I don't know why I should bother. So at this point, I want to just thank everyone who's maybe joined in the last few minutes. If you have got questions or comments for either myself or Nina, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So my next question for you, so we're talking about quite a lot, actually, looking at company culture, how you can embed it. So what makes a good company culture? What are some of the attributes of a company culture that is conducive and allows people to thrive?
I think the very first nugget here is to be intentional about it, because as mentioned, whether you want it or not, you have a culture. Do you let it run loose and let everyone unintentionally decide what it's like, or Are you clear about the values that you have? What is important for us in this organization, both internally, for our own people, for our customers, for our suppliers, for our partners? Because that is an expression of our culture, right, across the board. So I think intentionality is the first part in order to have a good and healthy company culture. The second is to be very clear and transparent about what do we mean by even our core values. Let's say you have your values and say one of them is respect. Well, we all have our own definition of what respect means, right? Even in the context of the workplace. So for us, what do we mean by that core value? And I would even say that, and that's what I've done previously and what Membrain was already doing, is to literally list what are the behaviors that support this value, that, make this value come alive, and what are the behaviors that do not, right? Because you can't expect everybody to have the same understanding of what we mean by those values. So being extremely explicit about that. And again, I think that's where input from the whole team is critical, because if from the top down you just dump on people, hey, this is who we're going to be from now on, it's not going to work. But gathering that input, so I'd say being intentional, clarity, and I think it's to notice, right, when people in the organization do something that is really aligned with your values, and when you observe behaviors that you want more of, make notice, write a comment on Slack like, hey, this was awesome. Or in a meeting, just, point out like, oh, I noticed that this colleague had this conversation with our customer and it was great. So be quick to elevate the behaviors that you want more of and that are an expression of your core values, and be as quick to address the behaviors that do not very early on, especially when people join, right? And that's why say recruitment is a key part of holding and being intentional about that culture, because we all have our baggage, right? And it's great because that also means we come with the experience that can contribute positively to the organization. But if you're not very clear from the beginning, okay, which of this whole pile of luggages, which one do you bring in and which one do you leave at the door? You can't expect people just to guess, right? So if there are some behaviors that you notice are like, well, you know what, this is not okay around here, just have the honesty to have that, bring it up, privately, with the people concerned, and just explain like, hey, this is our core values, this is what we mean by that, and therefore the way you behaved is counterproductive to the culture that we have, right? And the impact of that behavior is this and that. So, and again, and that's where I think being able to give feedback in a healthy way is also critical to that.
Yeah.
I could go on and on, but I think those are the major ones.
I think you hit on something really interesting around having those conversations, because I've been in situations where obviously behaviors are not quite what you want them to be, and it's really how to have that conversation in a way that it ends up being constructive and people don't end up feeling defensive. I think that's an important one, which I'm going to circle back to. The other one that you mentioned is around, I think people come with almost their own, you mentioned baggage, but it's almost like a cultural lens as well. I can give an example. So I might come into a meeting with other people and I feel like it's okay to say, oh, hi guys, and have a seat, but in that company it's good afternoon, gentlemen, for instance, and I'm just kind of coming and going, hi guys, because
Or you don't even say hello at all.
or you don't even say hello at all. Exactly. And there are people there thinking, oh, she's rude, or that's really informal, oh my goodness. And you don't know, because I've come with kind of how I am. And so I think having that conversation about, what's okay here, what's not okay here, and giving people the benefit of the doubt when they do something that is not quite what you would like to see, give them the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, it was okay in some part of their lives, right?
Mhm.
But it's just here, it's not quite how we would like to operate. So any tips you can give, Nina, for having those conversations? For instance, now I'm going nitty gritty now. So for instance, is there a particular way you would have those conversations? Would that be something in someone's diary? Would you just say, oh, can you just you just, oh, Jane, can I just see you briefly, and just make it quite like informal? Or would it be quite a formal conversation?
Mm.
How would you start that? What sort of questions would you ask the person? Would you even choose like a time of day to have it? Or are we overthinking it, right? Because I
Mm.
find that sometimes these things matter. It matters because it could impact how people receive this information that you're giving them, right?
Mm. And my answer to that would be both and.
Okay.
And because it depends a lot on the context, right? If it's something small, let's say a colleague, made a comment that it was not that bad, but at the same time, there's something in you that were just like, was that was that okay? I'm not sure, right? So then the best way is just to, while it's hot, just has like,
Mm,
hey, I perceive the comment that you just said as like this is how I experienced it, and what do you think,
yeah.
right? And have a conversation, engage in a dialogue. That's always the easiest way. It's to come into any conversation with that curiosity and not the judgment of, oh, you did something wrong, how can I make you feel smaller and punish you? That's never going to work. But rather like, hey, you did something. So I think that, and that's part of how to give feedback, which is inspired around, nonviolent communication, if
Mm,
that's familiar to you. I'm far from an expert or anything like that, but it's extremely powerful way to have those more difficult conversation. And it really starts with when you did this, and not, it's not about who you are. I think that's when given feedback, a lot of people say like, oh, you're always late. Well, always, is that
it's a bit
true?
harsh.
Right? It's like, oh, last week you came to this meeting 10 minutes late. So state the facts as objectively as you can and about the behavior of the person, not who the person is. And
Good
then go
one.
on, how did that make you feel? Right? So you you came 10 minutes late at the meeting last week that I was holding, and it made me feel disrespected, right? Because it made me feel like you don't respect my time the same way you respect your time or other people's time, right? And then we can go on like, how, can we talk about it, right? And say, what are your needs? Like, I would really appreciate, for you to be able to come on time or to inform me in advance when you can't come on time,
Yeah.
right? Because then you also open up for that curiosity and to understand from that person's perspective. Because maybe it's like, well, I had to go to the hospital to drop off my kids and my wife couldn't make it.
Mm,
And it's like, oh,
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like most of the time, as I would say the vast majority of humans, we are extremely self-centered, and we wrongly believe that everybody else's behavior is about us. Like,
I love that. It's
and
not.
it's not, because everybody is, preoccupied with what's
Yeah,
going
with our
on
own stuff.
inside.
Yeah, yeah.
But somehow we do project it in a way that it's, everybody else is, it's against me or for me, or it's not, it's about them.
Yeah, they're thinking about their own self and their own things that they need to sort, and you're not actually in their mind
No.
when they were doing it. And I think it's such a great point. You remind me of a conversation, and I've had more than once actually, with a lady called Gillian Thompson. I might tag her on this later to watch. But she said something really profound to me many years ago, and she's maybe even forgotten that, when you're in a conversation, as you know, like giving feedback or something's happened, like the late thing, like the example you've given, give people the benefit of the doubt in the sense that if this person was your best friend, what are the likely reasons why they've come late? So if this person had good intentions towards you and this person is your best friend, what are some of the reasons they might have been late? So could have been their child was sick and they had to go to the hospital. They may have been in a traffic jam. They were not expecting, a road was blocked and so on. And not jumping to the conclusion that this person is deliberately disrespected me and they haven't taken it seriously, blah, blah, blah. Because if this person was someone that you knew had good intentions towards you, you would come up with excuses for them, even in your mind. You would be like, oh, she must have forgotten it was in the calendar. Oh, something must have happened at home. And it's interesting you mentioned a similar thing, because coming into those conversations with the open mind to hear feedback and ask, this is how it made me feel. What do you think? What happened there? And giving the person an opportunity to, to share with you what's going on. I think that's really, really, really important. So you spoke about two ends of it. So tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind is a great prompt by Brené Brown. If you don't know her, find out who she is.
Yeah,
She's
I know
amazing.
her. I know her.
And what she says is, start with the story I'm telling myself is. Because we all tell ourselves those stories, right? The story I'm telling myself is that you do not respect my time. Right? Do you have proof of that? And again, coming up with that curiosity to inquire, what is your experience like? Because I know what my experience like, but I'm in no capacity to judge what your experience is like. So ask. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be oh, we happen to be at the coffee machine. It's like, yeah, by the way, that thing has been nugging at me, and I just wanted to I'm curious about what your experience was like.
Yeah. No, it's really good. And it sounds like, from what you're saying, if this becomes almost like culture, at the risk of using the word culture again, becomes part of the culture that people expect to be asked things like that. You expect that if someone behaves in a way that doesn't quite go down well, that it's normal for someone to say, hey, this thing happened, it's been nagging at me. What was that about? This is how and it's quite normal. Then it doesn't become this awkward thing. It doesn't become this thing where you marinate over it for days or even weeks and weeks, and then things become stifled, and whether we like it or not, it's going to impact performance. And coming back to sales, if you're in a team, obviously sales are, they need to be motivated to do the things that you want them to do, right? But imagine if people in that team are feeling like they've been undermined, or someone doesn't respect their time, and they've not been able to share how they feel, and just gradually you just notice this kind of shift away from motivation towards demotivation, because people are we're human beings, we're emotional beings, right? So if these things are not said, so it seems like actually having a culture where it's quite normal to say, hey, Nina, this has been nagging at me. Yesterday you said this in the meeting. What did you mean by that? Because I perceived it as this. And then you have that open conversation. That sounds like a really healthy environment to be in. So.
And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's hard, and at first it's gonna be really awkward and uncomfortable. That's a reality of it, right? But as I mentioned in the beginning, your culture are the accumulation of the normalized behavior in the organization, right? So if it is not, at first, it may not be normal to, have honest conversations with each other, even if it's about small things. But the more you have them, that awkwardness, that threshold of discomfort will decrease. And the more that is being repeated and encouraged and emulated, especially by, in this situation by managers or by leaders who not only can give that feedback, but especially who can receive it, right? Then it becomes normalized, and then it's not as awkward anymore. Another example, which is more on the, I would say, on a different note is one thing I've started to do in some of the internal meetings that I hold is to start with a breathing exercise. Takes less than a minute. And, we take 3 breaths together. It's, I am personally, I'm a meditator, and all of that kind of stuff is important for me personally. And I'm slowly starting to introduce that. And yeah, the first time I did it, I was like, oh, how is this going to go? Is everybody going to judge me that I'm one of those hippies? And what am I bringing into Membrain and so on? But it went really well. And then I did it again, and it's like, oh, ooh, this feels so nice. I feel so much more present. And yes, it's still awkward, but the more I do it, then maybe some others will take it up in their internal meetings without me being there. Then maybe, further down the line, let's say you're in a sales meeting, and you can see the person, and obviously you have to adjust. You can't just spring that on anyone.
Yeah.
If it's maybe a customer that you've spoken to already a few times, you know them, and you can see that they come in, they're flustered, they're not focused, they brought their whole previous meeting with them in this meeting. And just say, hey, is it okay if we take 15 seconds in silence together, just so that we get to be present here? Or take 1 or 2 breaths together just to be here? Is that okay? Right? That would probably not have happened if it hadn't started internally and slowly spread, because people feel like it's really beneficial for them. Right? Maybe they'll start doing that at the dinner table when all the kids are running riot and trying to get food into them. It's like, hey, you know what, guys, let's take 3 deep breaths together.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Yeah, well, that's a really good idea, actually. Really good idea. I was one of those people that felt like, all this breathing thing is just weird. It's for hippies. And it was a few years ago. I think it was maybe 2017. I went to this happy startup camp. It was called A Bunch of Strangers. I didn't know anyone there. It was just, I'm just one of those people. I saw something on LinkedIn. I thought, a summer camp with other startup founders. Good idea. So it was in England, somewhere in Surrey, and this whole breathing and meditation was just throughout the 3 days, probably 4 times a day. A lady called Sally would gather us and would be breathing. I was like, oh, here we go. The first time I was like, here we go. And like sitting on the ground and kind of like, And at the end of the first day, I was like, ooh, I just felt like this certain calmness and just really present, and almost like it just opened me up to be a vessel to receive all the good stuff that was happening there, in terms of the great talks and personal stories being shared. Even just eating the food, it was like I was present there. I think it helped that there was rubbish Wi-Fi, so I was rarely on my phone anyway. And yeah, and at the end of the 3 days, I came back like really calm. It just felt like I was on this kind of calm, it was like the sea just being calm. And I thought, what was that about? So I think it was a mixture of that whole breathing and obviously not being on devices. And then I realized, okay, maybe I am a bit of a weirdo, right? So I do like the breathing, the breath work. I think it's really interesting that you brought that into meetings, and especially if it's going to be a difficult conversation, Nina, it must be a really positive way to start if it is going to be a difficult meeting or some decisions are going to be made there, and just getting people centered and getting them present. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Listen, it was really, really good to have you on my LinkedIn Live today. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I hope you've enjoyed your time here. We are going to launch a blog or an interview that we did with Nina, actually, and that's going to go live on Tuesday. It's going to have a link to this LinkedIn Live as well. And that blog, I kid you not, is packed with value. It's one of the longest blogs we've ever written, just because there was just nothing we could remove. Everything was packed with value. So please follow the Dukaru page here on LinkedIn, because when it goes live, that's the first place where we're going to publish it. Thanks so much for your time, Nina. Really good to have you on the show today.
Thank you. This was amazing. It's just flown by. Thanks a lot, Kimmy, and thank you to all the team at Dakaru.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.